to basically go to war against Mexico is John Quincy Adams says, no, this is not about freedom. This is about protecting slavery. That doesn't sound like a person as portrayed in Spielberg's movie who doesn't care about slavery. So what happened with Amistad, if you don't see the movie, basically, essentially, are these folks slaves or free? And it revolved around the legal question of, are they slave, is it a slave rebellion at sea? They're freeing themselves. Were they free citizens in Africa? Yes, they were. So we need to return them to slavery. Return them, not to slavery, return them to Africa. So what happened is, the Supreme Court ruled that you have to send them to Africa, and you have to pay for it, since they were illegally taken. Well, the United States government didn't do that. Nope, we ain't got the money. So it took them another several years to get back, eventually. So remember the Alamo. So, as a result of losing the war, Mexico lost all the territory and all that, and that's where the present quote-unquote border was created. So, thus, people who were free people of color suddenly became, in some states, quote-unquote Americans. And at the time, of course, so California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, and Texas. So the native nations, of course, weren't conquered, and that would come a little later. So as an example of a native nation, 6 nations, this is the Iroquois Confederacy, composed of 6 nations. Each nation has clans. A person's clan is the same as their mother's clan. The members of each clan are all related to each other through their mothers. So this is called a matrilineal system. Each clan is represented by a different animal. Traditionally, a person could not marry someone from within the same clan, and there are certain clans that can't marry each other, but it's probably more complicated. So there are presently, within 6 nations, 9 clans divided into animals from 3 earth elements: land, air, and water. So the water creatures are the turtle, beaver, and eel. So these are all clans. The land creatures are the deer, wolf, and bear. And the creatures of the sky are hawk, heron, and snipe. So the natural world is, again, basically symbolized by these beings. So prior to the peacemaker, there were numerous other clans such as Sweet Potato, Rock, and Ball. Now, the reason I bring this up, after the formation of the Iroquois Confederacy, the number of clans was reduced to 9 represented below those animal clans. And why I bring this up, the conquest of the Indian nations is part of the concept of manifest destiny. Because remember, with the whole papal bulls, Christians' duty is to conquer everybody that's non-Christian and take their lands. So the United States is still part of that principle. So even though you've got rivals for taking that over, so manifest destiny means the United States is going to be continuous up until in the early colonies, up until the Appalachians. Then we acquire the Louisiana Purchase. Now we got to push to the sea, and it's Mexico that's got all that stuff. So we got to get that from Mexico. Sea to shining sea. Manifest destiny. So one of the barriers to that is 6 nations. So the Mohawk people, Oneida people, people of Standing Stone, Onondaga, who are people of the hills, Cayuga, people of the Great Swamp, 1, 2, 3, 4, Seneca, and then Tuscarora was added as the sixth nation. So the great peacemaker, who is by tradition his name isn't spoken aloud, who we hear about most, was his disciple or lieutenant, Hiawatha. He was an actual person. And so what was happening, the formation of Six Nations happened in 1100. With prior to that time, these nations were at war. All kinds of bad and nasty things were happening as a result of the war. And at one point, a great chief, who's named in English the Peacemaker, and his disciple Hiawatha united the nations, the five nations originally, and then Tuscarora was added later as Six Nations. And these are the people of one of the original people of the Longhouse. And the Longhouse is built with the sacred white pine. And so when you hear about Six Nations, this is where the concept of indigenous democracy comes from. Basically, the model being Six Nations. Handsome Lake, another religious leader, great leader and prophet, played a major role in the reawakening of the people of the Longhouse, or Six Nations Confederacy. He preached a message that combined traditional religious beliefs with a revised code meant to bring consciousness to the Haudenosaunee after a long period of cultural disintegration following colonization. Part of what happened with colonization was the introduction of firewater, where from an African American analysis, you essentially have what I refer to as axiochemistry. And how axiochemistry works is so axiochemistry is essentially cultural values around substance use. And the idea about these, so you have basically medicine, leisure, commodity, political tool, weapon. There's another one in here, sacrament. Could actually move that over. And weapon. So these are uses of drug substances. So here's what happens in terms of looking at the history of a substance with a people. Alcohol technology happens wherever you can have the climate that supports fermentation of fruit at room temperature plus an agricultural surplus. No agricultural surplus, no alcohol. Or no agriculture, no alcohol. Right? So, for example, the Inuit, also known as the Eskimos, no alcohol technology, no agriculture, because nobody's going to be drinking fermented walrus blood, right? And you have to have fruit and vegetables, and they don't grow on the ice. So the Aztecs had corn beer. And Six Nations had elderberry wine. But the value was, And their technology showed them that, okay, we only use this like tobacco for prayer. Okay, so we got tobacco from Native Americans, but Native Americans didn't make Marlboros. Because the idea with that particular herb is you're smoking for prayer, so that your prayers go out. You do not inhale the tobacco. Therefore, you don't develop cancer. You don't, and since you're not smoking every 5 minutes, you're praying every 5 minutes. Right? It's a sacrament. Same with alcohol. They understood 4,000 years ago that alcohol hurt the fetus and pregnant women. So pregnant women didn't drink in these ceremonies, and kids didn't drink in these ceremonies. You only drank one symbolic cup, and not to intoxication. Ever. So you don't develop alcoholism, particularly with the Aztecs, who were kind of radical about that. If you were publicly drunk, so if you were a high-class person like a warrior or something like that, and you're publicly drunk outside of a ceremony, they killed you. First offense. If you're a lower-class person, you got beaten first, and second offense, they killed you. So alcoholism would be very low in Aztec culture. Six Nations wasn't as radical. They just, raised you right and maybe shunned you, but alcoholism wouldn't develop. So what Handsome Lake was dealing with in between the formation of the original Confederacy in the 1100s was the impact of colonization, one of which would be, all right, actually not medicine here, it's supposed to be medicine, not weapon. So medicine to weapon. So when you first find a substance that's in your axiochemistry or in your pharmacology, if you want to use that word, use it for healing. If the substance is psychoactive, you can use it as a sacrament to induce, literally sacrament means sacred mind. So to induce a psychological state that is conducive with your spirituality. All right? So native use of alcohol basically followed this line, medicine or sacrament. Okay? You didn't develop an addiction problem with it. Europeans getting the distilled out, so basically at contact had essentially beer and wine strength alcohol. So at most 12 to 19%. Now, in order to make stronger alcohol, you need to distill, a distillery, which means metallurgy, which means the original Egyptian invention of the still, which was a state secret until European conquest, and then it leaked out. Now you have monks and things making brandy out of wine and vodka, et cetera, ouzo, whatever. Europeans are bringing hard alcohol to America for the first time. And it'd be like essentially giving somebody crack when they'd never done cocaine or never even smoked pot. Instantly addictive, and so natives called it firewater because it literally burns. Not only does it catch fire, but it burns going down, and it's stronger than anything that they had ever seen. So one of the reasons that in Egypt it wasn't let out is because of its deleterious effect. They knew the technology, but they could have made money from it, but chose not to because their axiochemistry said, okay, we need to value people's spirits over making money. So, but basically by the time that after first contact happened, you had the Puritans in the 1600s giving rum to 4-year-olds to put them to sleep, which is not something that we would do today, right? That's called child abuse. We also didn't invent the concept of fetal alcohol syndrome until 1978. Okay? So when the Puritans are giving rum to 4-year-olds, the concept of addiction didn't exist in Western civilization. they felt that they were giving their kids the aqua vitae, literally what they called alcohol, and in Latin that means the water of life. So it's no more harmful for you than water. Okay, but natives knew, no, you don't give this to anybody outside of a ceremony, and they're also using a lesser potent form of alcohol anyway, elderberry wine. So what happens then is, as if you have a substance as a medicine or a sacrament, you are unprepared for its use as a weapon. Okay? You are unprepared for its use as a weapon. So one of the things that happened, especially when we'll see this when the Indian Wars begin in earnest, but certainly as a byproduct of colonization, native nations are being exposed to alcohol. Handsome Lake was an alcoholic, and he cured himself, mostly by abstinence, and then had a vision after he cured himself of basically, we're going to have to revise our religious beliefs in the face of this cultural disintegration that was partially brought about by alcohol. Come back, thank you. Because there were, so for example, it was illegal for Native Americans to drink alcohol according to federal law before 1952. Before 1952. So when there was trade in alcohol, it was actually, and done with the full knowledge of Congress, it was actually illegal for that to happen. But that meant that Indian agents, not Native Americans, Indian agents of the United States government actually flooded reservations with alcohol. And part of this trade that was happening also between the British and the French with whiskey spread among folks who had no defenses against it, and Handsome Lake was one of those folks that began to reform their culture towards more sobriety. And the Code of Handsome Lake is actually still practiced today among Six Nations, but also as part of the well-briety movement. So a little biography of him. Which I'll leave up. And we will go to the Civil War. That's all I got for today. 2 minutes? Cut it now.
Don't